The city lights flickered in the distance. The roads were quiet, and the hum of the engine was the only sound that filled the air. He sat behind the wheel, lost in his thoughts, unaware that tonight his life would change forever. The road stretched endlessly ahead, dark and silent. His eyes were heavy, but his mind was racing. Memories, regrets, dreams, they all collided inside his head as the car moved faster and faster. Sometimes, the most ordinary nights hide the most extraordinary storms. Then in a split second, everything shattered. Headlights blinded him. Tires screamed. Metal twisted. Glass exploded into 1,000 pieces that cut through the night like shards of lightning. The world spun violently, a blur of darkness and fire. And then, silence. The car lay wrecked on the side of the road, smoke rising into the night sky. His body was broken, pinned against the cold steel. The taste of blood filled his mouth. The sound of his heartbeat echoed louder than the sirens in the distance. He tried to breathe, but each breath was a war. Pain surged through every vein, every bone, every corner of his soul. The world around him blurred, fading in and out like a broken film reel. Was this the end? Was this where his story stopped? In those moments of chaos, time slows down. 1,000 thoughts rush through your mind. The faces of loved ones, the weight of unfinished dreams, the fear of never getting another chance. He wanted to scream, but his voice was lost in the wreckage. The road was empty. The night was merciless. And there he was, broken, bleeding, forgotten. Minutes felt like hours. Each second was heavier than the last. His eyes flickered open and shut. He thought of his family, of promises he had made, of the life he might never see again. Darkness pulled him in, whispering softly, "Let go, it's over." But somewhere, deep within, a spark still burned. A whisper that fought against the silence. Not yet. This is not where it ends. The crash had taken his strength, but not his will. His hands trembled. His body screamed in agony. But his soul refused to surrender. As his vision blurred and consciousness slipped away, one thought remained. If I survive this, I will never be the same again. The sirens grew louder. Lights flashed against the broken glass. And as his eyes finally closed, the world around him vanished into darkness. This was the fall, the moment when life shatters and everything you know disappears. But sometimes the end is only the beginning. He opened his eyes to a world that was no longer familiar. White walls, the sharp smell of disinfectant, machines beeping rhythmically in the background. His body was wrapped in wires, tubes, and bandages. Every breath reminded him of the wreck. Every blink carried the weight of the crash. Days passed, though he couldn't tell how many. Time had lost its meaning. The hospital room became a prison. The window showed him a sky he couldn't touch, a life that felt 1,000 miles away. And then came the whispers, not voices around him, but the voices within. Doubt, fear, regret. They crawled into his mind like shadows, telling him over and over, "You will never walk again. You will never rise again. Your story is over." His friends came. His family came. But he could see it in their eyes, the pity, the sadness, the hidden fear. They tried to smile. They tried to give him hope, but he knew. Deep down, they didn't believe he could make it back. Not after the way his body was broken. Nights were the hardest. When the lights dimmed and the world went quiet, the silence grew heavier. He would stare at the ceiling, his body aching, his mind replaying the crash again and again. The sound of metal, the scream of tires, the moment his life changed forever. It haunted him like a nightmare that wouldn't end. And in that silence, he started to believe it. That maybe this was it. Maybe his life had been reduced to 4 walls, a broken body, and a memory of the man he used to be. Weeks turned into months. His muscles weakened, his spirit dimmed. He watched the world move on without him. Friends stopped visiting. Calls became fewer. Life outside those walls continued, while his life was frozen in place. There's a pain that runs deeper than broken bones. A pain that no medicine can cure. The pain of being forgotten. The pain of believing that your best days are behind you. Every time the doctors came in, their words sounded colder. Recovery will be difficult. Mobility may never return. Prepare yourself for a different kind of life. Different kind of life. The phrase echoed in his mind like a death sentence. Was this his destiny now? A life of limits, of memories of what once was? Some days he cried. Some days he stared into the void, numb and silent. And some days he wished he hadn't survived at all. That is what silence does. It doesn't just surround you, it eats you alive. And yet, deep inside, that spark remained. The same spark that had whispered to him at the crash. Faint, fragile, but alive. A quiet voice that said, "Endure. Don't give up. Not yet." He didn't know why it was still there. He didn't know how it survived when everything else inside him was breaking. But it was there, refusing to die. And in the silence of that hospital room, with nothing but pain for company, he made a choice. If life had not taken him yet, maybe it wasn't done with him. If breath still filled his lungs, maybe it was for a reason. If his heart still beat, maybe it was for something greater. But to find out, he would have to rise from the silence. This was the darkness before the dawn, the quiet before the storm, the emptiness before the fire. The silence had broken him. Now it was time to break the silence. Asterisk, asterisk. Every storm eventually runs out of rain. Every night eventually meets the dawn. For months, he had lived inside the silence. Pain had been his companion, loneliness his shadow. But on one ordinary morning, something shifted. The sun crept through the hospital window, painting the room with gold. For the first time in months, he really looked at it. The light. It wasn't just sunlight. It was a reminder. A reminder that the world was still alive, still moving, still waiting. He thought of the promises he had made before the crash. To his family. To himself. Promises left unfinished. Dreams left unchased. And in that moment, he realized he still had breath in his lungs, blood in his veins, and a heart that refused to stop. That spark, the one that had whispered in the wreckage, now roared louder. Get up. Don't quit. This is not where your story ends. The doctors told him he might never walk again. The nurses said recovery would be long, maybe impossible. But he remembered something his father once told him. Impossible is just a word the weak use to stop the strong. So he made a choice. Not to surrender. Not to fade away. But to fight. The fight didn't start in the gym. It didn't start in therapy. It started in his mind. In every small thought. Every small decision. To push against the voice that said, "You can't," with a louder voice that answered, "I will." Day after day, he forced himself to try. To move a finger. To shift a hand. To sit up on his own. The pain was unbearable, but pain was no longer his enemy. It was his teacher. Every ache reminded him that he was alive. Every struggle meant progress. Nurses watched in disbelief. Doctors shook their heads. But he didn't care. He wasn't fighting for their approval. He was fighting for his life. And then came the breakthrough. One night, alone in the silence, he willed his leg to move. For hours he tried, sweat dripping, body trembling, heart pounding. And then it happened. The smallest twitch. A spark of movement. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Because that tiny movement was proof. Proof that he wasn't finished. Proof that his body was listening to his will. Proof that where there was one spark, a fire could be born. From that moment, something inside him lit up. He began to push harder, to endure longer, to embrace the pain as fuel. Each day became a battlefield, and every small victory was a trophy. The man who once thought he had lost everything was now discovering something new, his own strength, a strength he never knew existed. He started to imagine the future again, not as a broken man, but as a warrior who had been through hell and lived to rise again. His scars became symbols of survival. His pain became his weapon. And with every step, every push, every struggle, the silence that once drowned him was being replaced with a voice. His own voice, louder than ever. I will rise. I will fight. I will live. This was not just recovery. This was rebirth. The crash had taken much from him. But in its aftermath, he had found something far greater, the fire inside. And that fire was unstoppable. Asterisk, asterisk, strength is not built in comfort. It is forged in struggle. The hospital became his battlefield, the hallways his training ground. Every morning, before the sun rose, he prepared himself for war, not against another man, but against his own limits. His body screamed in pain. His muscles burned. His bones felt like they would break all over again. Every step with the crutches was like walking through fire. Every attempt to stand was a war between gravity and willpower. Most people would have stopped. Most people would have surrendered. But he was no longer most people. The crash had destroyed his old life, but it had also stripped away his fears. What was there left to lose? Nothing. What was there to gain? Everything. So he fought, hour after hour, day after day, sweat dripping, fists clenched, jaw tight with determination. When his body said enough, his mind screamed back, not yet. When his legs shook, he forced them to hold. When he fell, he made it his mission to rise again. The world around him faded, the doctor's doubts, the nurse's pity, the whispers of failure. None of it mattered. The only sound he listened to was the beating of his own heart, pushing him forward like a war drum. People began to notice. The same nurses who once shook their heads now stood in awe. The same doctors who once doubted now whispered, "This is impossible." But for him, impossible was just another challenge to crush. Training moved from steps to strides, from crutches to shaky walks, from shaky walks to stronger ones. He set goals for himself. One more step, one more push, one more victory every single day. And every time he hit the floor, he remembered the wreck. He remembered the crash. He remembered the silence. And he used that memory not as a chain, but as fuel. His pain was no longer his prison. It was his power. There were nights he couldn't sleep when his body begged for rest. But instead of despair, he stared at his scars and whispered, "These are not signs of weakness. These are medals of survival." Each scar told a story. Each bruise carried a lesson. Each moment of pain carved him into something stronger than steel. Soon, he wasn't just surviving. He was transforming. The man who lay broken in a wreck was gone. In his place stood a fighter, tougher, sharper, unstoppable. He began to inspire others. Patients watched him and found courage. Nurses cheered for him. Even strangers who heard his story felt the fire. Because his struggle wasn't just about him anymore. It was bigger. It was proof. Proof that no matter how broken, no matter how lost, the human spirit can rise. And yet, the road was far from easy. There were relapses, injuries, setbacks. Moments where his legs gave out, where progress vanished overnight. Moments where tears replaced sweat. But he had made a promise to himself, never quit. So he wiped his tears. He clenched his fists. And he fought again. The struggle had become his identity. The fight had become his purpose. And with every battle, every fall, every rise, he was writing a story no crash could ever erase. Because the wreck may have broken his body, but it had built his soul. Asterisk, asterisk. And then the day came. The day he had dreamed of through every sleepless night. The day he had fought for through every drop of sweat, every tear, every scar. The day when struggle transformed into triumph. He stood in front of the mirror, no longer seeing a broken man, but a warrior. His body carried scars, yes, but his eyes carried fire. The crash had left its mark, but it had also awakened a strength far greater than he had ever known. Step by step he walked, not with crutches, not with hesitation, but with power. The same legs that once lay lifeless in the wreck now carried him forward like iron pillars. The same heart that almost stopped that night now thundered inside his chest with the force of storm. He returned to the road, the same kind of road where everything had once fallen apart. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He stood tall, breathing in the air, feeling the wind against his face. The road no longer haunted him. It called to him. It was no longer the place of his death. It was the symbol of his rebirth. Crowds gathered to see him. Some came out of curiosity, some out of disbelief, and some because they needed hope. And when they saw him walk, when they saw him rise, they realized they weren't just watching a man. They were watching a miracle. Reporters called it unbelievable. Doctors called it impossible, but he didn't care what they called it. To him, it was simple. He had refused to die. He had refused to surrender. And now, he had risen. He spoke to them, not with bitterness, but with power. Life will break you. It will tear you apart. It will throw you into darkness when you least expect it. But listen to me. Scars are not the end. They are proof that you fought, proof that you endured, proof that you survived. The crash took my body, but it gave me my soul. The wreck ended one life, but gave birth to another. And if I can rise from the ashes of that night, so can you. The crowd erupted, but more powerful than the applause was the silence that followed. The silence in every heart that had just been lit with hope. Because his story was no longer about him. It was about everyone who had ever fallen. Everyone who had ever broken. Everyone who had ever thought they were finished. The rise was not just his victory. It was a reminder that the human spirit cannot be destroyed. And so he walked forward, one step at a time, toward the horizon. No fear, no regret, no chance, only freedom, only fire. The crash had been the end of one chapter. But this was the beginning of the rest of his life. Because in the wreckage of that night, he had found the truth. You are stronger than your pain, greater than your scars. And when life breaks you, you don't just recover. You rise. Asterisk.